What is going on, gunfighters? Lesser trained and practiced fighting handgun skills. That is what we're going to talk about today. Things you might be neglecting if you want to be a full-bodied, well-rounded, versatile gunfighter. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about all manner of gun and gun-related topics the right way with God Almighty at the center, biblical, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am blessed to be your host, military law enforcement, private security contracting, state rifle and pistol champion a few times over, professional firearms instructor, and private security contractor. It's my current occupation, and some other stuff that thrown in, or urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps. I guess that's all germane to today's topic. Let me pick out a piece of that and talk about, I've trained a lot of people. I've trained a lot of civilians, law enforcement, military, and I even trained at one of the largest training academies in the country, professional firearms instructor for them. I'm an F.B.I. certified firearms instructor. I've trained a lot of dudes. I have qualified a lot of dudes. So there are some things that people practice quite a bit, and there's things that people neglect, I've noticed. This may or may not apply to you, but I think in my broad spectrum of teaching people that it applies to a lot of you. It applies to a lot of people. And if I call myself out, a lot of these things I probably should practice more. So that's what we're going to talk about today, things that we should be practicing more as far as handgun skills go. Now let me start off this by saying you need to have a firm grasp of the fundamentals. A firm grasp of the fundamentals. Let me try that again, right? So if your fundamentals are not solid, you don't have a firm foundation, don't try this other stuff yet, right? If you can't stand with you not moving, with a target not moving, with a broadside target, and you can't stand there with a proper two-handed grip with no time limit and, get rounds to hit well at 25 yards. And I'm not talking about hitting a silhouette. I'm talking about like hitting in the zero down zone, whether that's, a USPSA target or an IDPA target or a B-27. You can't stack rounds in that good zone at 25 yards. That's not even where I would stop. That's where I would start, as like, now I have a firm grasp of the fundamentals with a fighting handgun, a combat handgun. I can stand on any given day and stack rounds at 25 yards, getting them in that A zone, that zero down zone, no penalty zone, depending on your target, your qual. If you can't do that, don't worry about, I'm going to, do a combat roll shooting mid-run with my left hand only, right? That's not what you should be working on. You should be working on the fundamentals. And even after you start dipping your toe into these, let's say, more esoteric and more unique situations, you need to have a firm grasp of those fundamentals. And even when you do, you need to go back to the fundamentals. Handgunning, even more than a lot of other shooting skills, handgunning is a perishable skill. So you always need to go back to the fundamentals and practice the fundamentals. And, your classic fundamentals, stance, grip, sight alignment, sight picture, trigger control, breath control, follow through. I would add into the fighting handgun fundamentals the draw. The draw is like a basic thing. If you're not even good with the draw yet, I don't just mean getting your gun out. I mean getting it out quickly and on target, like sub-second. That would be a good draw time, sub-second. If you're not there yet, that's what you need to be working on. I would consider that a fundamental. So, again, don't worry about doing, the tactical backflip while you're doing a speed reload if you can't do those basic skills. Everybody starts somewhere. I didn't pop out of my mama's womb with a pistol in each hand, right? So we all start somewhere, and I was there one day. So don't try and put the cart before the horse. The first one I'm going to talk about is going to be I'm going to call it CQB, but this is not CQB depends on what you're talking about, right? The Marine Corps says something different for CQB than, law enforcement might call CQB. But really what I'm talking about is ECQB, Extreme Close Quarters Battle. And what I'm talking about is like elevator distance, if you can picture that. Like not so like some giant elevator in Vegas, but like a regular elevator if you go to a metro area and you're going to like somebody's office on the 3rd, 5th floor or whatever, a regular sized elevator, that kind of distance, like closer than double arms distance. I would consider that extreme close quarters battle. This is a skill you should be practicing. This is one of the stupid things that when I had TV, you would see all the time on like these stupid action movies or these stupid television shows where like somebody's going to shoot somebody and they're like right up in their grill and they put their arm out with the gun pointed at their face. That's a good way to get the gun taken away. That's a stupid thing to do. Nobody that knows what they're doing is going to do that, right? That's why when they like reach up and smack the gun away, yeah, because that's a stupid way to hold the gun. If you know what you're doing, you're not going to gangster style throw your hand out there and put the gun in somebody's face. That's a stupid thing to do. I don't need to put my gun in their face to shoot them. The proper thing to do is to have a close in tight retention technique where the gun is close to my body, my elbow is tucked in, and that gives me the mechanical advantage. That means that they have to reach out and grab the gun, which puts me at the mechanical advantage of keeping the gun. If my arm's out and their arms are closer to their body, that gives them the advantage taking the gun away. That's just one example. But extreme close quarter stuff, shooting from retention, getting shots off from retention, and getting them, close into your body. That's part of extreme close quarters. Another part would be something like the car technique, center axis relock. That's something you should be practicing. Gun takeaways, something you should be practicing. Gun retention. Like if somebody does grab your gun, how do you keep the gun in the holster? If your gun's out of the holster, how do you keep a hold of the gun? How do you train for that and shoot if somebody has a hold of your gun? There are techniques that you can do to, if it's a semi-auto or a revolver, still try and get shots off. Even if somebody has your gun grabbed, people think, and there's a revolver for this is not better than a semi-auto. It's just different. Yes, if you push a semi-auto into somebody hard, it will go out of battery. So don't do that. But also a revolver, if somebody's like, you can shove the revolver in and pull the trigger. Yes, you can. But if somebody grabs the cylinder, you can't even get one shot off. So they're just different. You have to know different techniques for different guns in the gun that you carry. So that's all part of that. Weapons retention, getting back your weapon, keeping control of your weapon, keeping your gun in the holster. Those are all things as far as extreme close quarters battle that you probably should be practicing that you're probably not. And if before you start live firing this stuff, dry fire it. Most of those skills you can practice dry fire, even with a dummy gun, because you're not so much worried about trigger control on those drills. So even a dummy gun, rolling around with your buddy on the ground, those are good things to practice. Those are good techniques to have. A lot of fights end up on the ground, and a lot of gunfights end up on the ground too. So not all, and I think you should know how to shoot well at a longer range. That's why I said if you can't, get good zero down hits at 25, don't even practice with this, because that's more important. If you can't do the fundamentals, you're not going to be able to do this. If you can't shoot good slow, you're not going to shoot good fast. So that said, it's a different skill set. A lot of times you may not even be using your sight. You may be shooting by braille, right? You got your gun shoved into something and you're pulling the trigger. Or you've got there's ways to do it with semi-auto, which visual is better than audio for that. But there are certain ways that you can use the semi-auto and shove your gun into somebody and pull the trigger. But that you're not so much worried about sight alignment, right? And trigger control. But it's built on the fundamentals. So that's all part of ECQB. So there's that. One thing that's often neglected is one-handed shooting. Shooting one-handed, shooting right hand only, left hand only. You might hear strong hand, weak hand. You might hear somebody be like, I'm so tactical, I don't have a weak hand. I have a support hand, a primary hand and a support. Okay, whatever. Like, you know what I'm talking about. Shooting with either hand, one-handed. That is a skill a lot of people don't like to practice because it's harder. You have to take more time. You are not going to be as good with it. Right, that's why we use two hands. If we were just as good with one hand, everybody would just shoot one-handed all the time. But you're better with two hands. Therefore, a lot of people neglect practicing with one hand. So practice with one hand and practice with either hand. obvious reasons for this for practical handgunning is you may be on the phone with emergency services. You may be dragging your wounded buddy out of a room. You may be holding a child or any number of other things, right? So being able to shoot with either hand, that is an important skill to have. So have that skill. Practice that skill. Once you've done a fair bit of practice shooting either hand, you should also learn to reload with either hand. Like if your gun's in your left hand, learn how to reload with the gun in your left hand. You can do that using both hands. You should be familiar with it. You should learn how to reload with just the left hand. So what do you do with your gun? If it's in your left hand, you've been shot in your right arm, and your right arm, like you've been shot, right arm, and it shattered your upper arm and you can't even move it. So it's useless to you for reloads, but you're out of ammo and now you're still in the gunfight. So what do? You curl up in a ball and suck your thumb? Probably not going to end well for you. So how do you reload that gun if you only have your left hand? Well, there's ways to do it. You can store it under your armpit. You can store it between your legs, reach down, grab your mag, throw it in, grab it again. You can put it back in your holster, assuming your setup will allow it and you can reach it. You can stow it back in your holster, hitting the mag release, letting that mag out, putting the new one in while it's in your holster, grabbing it out again. There are different techniques for this, but you're going to need to know what works for you and which technique is best for you by you actually, guess what? Practicing that skill. The time to figure out how to reload your gun, when you've lost a lot of blood and you're in pain, it's probably not the time to figure that skill out. Probably automaticity and having done that before is a good skill to have. Also, like how do you rack your gun one-handed with either hand, right hand or left hand? So how do you load the gun with one hand, either hand? That's a good skill to have. How can you draw the gun with your weak hand? That's a good thing to know, and you should have your holster in such a position that you can draw it with either hand. If you can't, that's probably a bad position. And some people are more sprightly than others, but that's something to consider. So, not saying you got to do this every day in your rotation, but every once in a while you should brush up on these techniques. We talked about 25 yards-ish. We talked about extreme close quarters. How about longer range with a handgun? I've gone out and just shot 200 yards with my carry gun just for funsies, just to do it, right? You don't have to go that extreme, but you should, strive for, after you get your 25 yards down, push it to 35, push it to 50, push it to farther than that, right? Why, if most handgun ranges are closer? Well, most are, but not all are. Sometimes handgun shootouts are at longer range. Also, for the average person that concealed carries, which is probably you listening, that's your primary. I know a lot of people say your rifle is your primary, your shotgun's your primary, your pistol is to fight your way to your rifle. Okay, but for most people, the handgun is what you're going to have, right? That's what you're going to have where you're at, and you're probably not going to have the time to go to a rifle or a shotgun. If you do, that's great. I've done an entire series on truck guns. So, of course, have a rifle handy, have a shotgun handy, but most people walking around, right, if there's an active shooter in Walmart and you're in the back of Walmart and you have to go all the way through Walmart and all the way to your car and come back, it's probably too late. You're probably fighting with the gun that you brought, and that's probably your handgun. So for a lot of people, for a lot of their life, the handgun is their primary. So if you have to take a longer shot, you should know your limitations, right? What's that quote? I think John Wayne, attributed to John Wayne. He probably didn't come up with it. Probably said it in a movie from quoting somebody else. But a man's got to know his limitations. Know what range at which you can get hits. And try getting hits at longer range. You may surprise yourself. On that, most of the time we practice standing. Also, you should practice kneeling and prone. Prone is an often neglected handgun shooting skill. But just like with a rifle, you can get a lot more stability from shooting prone if you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing and just drop in the prone, it's probably going to be worse. But if you know what you're doing, shoving that mag hard into the ground, getting a good sight picture, depending on your body position, like laying your head along your arm, getting a good stable position, prone can be an extremely accurate position for handgun shooting. So practice shooting pistol from the prone. Also, supine. What's supine? That's on your back. Prone is on your stomach, supine's on your back. That's what that means. So practice that in case you get knocked on your butt, in case you fall to the ground, in case of whatever reason, you can practice supine. Actually, that's like an old classic silhouette shooting stance. If you're really good with it and you know how to brace yourself, you can shoot pistol really well supine. But even just getting hasty shots off supine, even like, extreme close quarter stuff supine, like if somebody knocks you on your butt and you got to draw and get a shot off on your back, Can you do that quickly? Or does your elbow hit the ground and you got to modify your draw technique? That's something you'll know if you practice. But it's something a lot of people don't practice. So practice that skill. Also, urban rollover prone. If you don't know what that is, you should probably look it up. But rollover prone comes in handy quite a bit in urban environments for like shooting under a vehicle and staying low. Taking cover if the only cover you can get is something like a gutter or a curb in an urban environment, right? That's kind of why it's called urban rollover prone. Like if you are in that kind of environment or on a stairwell or something like that, that may be the best position for you. So learn how to get shots off in a rollover prone before you get shot at in a rollover prone. So again, another position you should practice. So again, prone, supine, and rollover prone. You should be practicing those. And obviously practicing the rollover prone from either side, laying on your right side, laying on your left side. Now, I reached out to Troy, one of the people that has supported the podcast quite a bit over the years. I'm blessed to have him as a friend and a patron, or he was a patron. I don't know if he still is a patron, but he likewise is a state pistol champion. I know the amount of discipline it takes to achieve that. Right, so he knows his stuff when it comes to handgun shooting. He's also a hired gun. He's a professional gunfighter. So I asked him and reached out to him, and he had some really good things to say. So let me bring that up. What does Troy, I don't know if he wants me to use his last name, what does Troy have to say about combat handgun skills you should be practicing? Okay, he's got some really good stuff. I sent him mine first, and I said, what did I forget? And he did not disappoint. Troy came through. Shooting torso targets that are wearing a shirt so you can't see where the bullet's hitting. Yeah, so you know if you can't see scoring rings, right, where to actually shoot. And that's a good one. I'm going to add to that, study human anatomy and bulldog anatomy and elk anatomy, deer anatomy, whatever is germane to you. But study anatomy. That is an important part of gunfighting. That's a real thing, right? Knowing different angles. Like a lot of times we just practice with somebody standing broadside. What if they're not? What if they're shooting somebody else? A woman or a child and they're 90 degrees to you. A lot of people make that shot wrong. So knowing where to shoot and anatomy. But yeah, shooting torso targets that are wearing a shirt so you can't see where the bullet's hitting. Rock on, Troy. Good one. Shot calling. This is a very good skill. You're not going to be very good at shooting competition or really practical stuff if you can't call your shots. Meaning I know where the bullet went, whether good or bad, whether a 10 ring or a 5 ring, I know where that bullet went before I look at the target. Like I can tell when that shot breaks where it's going to go. Shot calling. Be a shot caller. Like listen to the rappers. You got to be a shot caller. That is absolutely a very important skill. I wouldn't call that like the foundation, but it's a core skill for being a good shooter. Shooting while moving. Yes, that's a core one. You should be able to shoot while moving, particularly moving backwards or at oblique angles. Absolutely. I'll never retreat. Okay, well then you're probably going to get shot and die. What if you're in a shootout and your only cover is behind you, 2 feet behind you? You're not going to move back and take cover. Like that's silly. What if somebody's running at you with a knife full bore and you need to get your gun out, and even if you have a sub-second draw, you taking a few steps back is going to get you the time needed because now he's got to run farther that you can get a couple shots in him. Like, yeah, of course you're going to go backwards. Like, that's a silly thing to say. But learning to shoot while moving, shoot while running, shoot while walking, different speeds. Again, know your limitations. But, yeah, all angles. Forward, back, side to side, oblique angles. A lot of people neglect the 45-degree angles. Very important. Don't neglect that shooting on the move. Draw and shoot while sitting. Yep, that's an important one, especially if you have a job where you sit a lot. Cops sit a lot in their car a lot. If you work at a desk or something, sitting a lot. Yes, target and shooting while sitting while the target is left or right of you. Obviously, the target's not always going to be right in front of you. So, yeah, practicing shooting and sitting at different angles. Visual start signals. This is a good one. If you're into practical shooting and competition shooting, a lot of times it's shooter ready, stand by, beep. All right, that's your standard signal to go. But sometimes the cue is visual. Sometimes somebody grabs their waistband and grabs the handle of a gun. So visual start signals, whatever you want that to be. It could be somebody waving a piece of paper in front of you. It could be any number of things, right? When a light turns green or red, or a target faces or doesn't face. That's a real easy one if you're at a range that has facing targets. But yeah, target facing, visual go time instead of just audible go time. That's a good one. Oh, stop shooting signal. This is a good one. He said stop shooting signals for rapid fire. That is a phenomenal skill to have. A lot of times you practice, how can I shoot as quickly as possible? Yes, but can you stop quickly? What if a little girl walks in front of you when you're shooting somebody, right? You got to know when to not pull the trigger. That is absolutely a gunfighter skill, knowing when to not pull the trigger. So yeah, stop shooting signals. That's a very good one. I don't know that I've ever practiced that other than like the target turning. Obviously that would be that, but yeah, a not shoot signal. That's a very good one that I probably should practice. A not knowing when not to shoot and practicing shooting really fast and then stopping suddenly when somebody else tells you, not when you want to stop, but when the environment dictates that you stop. That's a great one, Troy. Any drill where you are forced to think while shooting, for instance, unusual variations of the casino drill. Yeah, this is a good one. And another good one is a lot of times they'll have targets with like different cards. That's what he's referring to as a casino drill. So somebody will call out, shoot me, a straight flush, shoot me a royal flush, and you shoot the cards. There's like a deck of cards on a target, or they'll say, shoot me a pair, or shoot me whatever it is, right? So you shoot me a pair of aces, and that you have to think about what you're doing, find the targets and engage the targets. Very germane to gunfighting, to practical combat shooting. That's a great one. There's also the targets with like, I don't know the name of the target, but it's like a yellow circle, a red triangle, a blue square. I could be mixing those up, but it's something like that. And somebody will call out, shoot me a 2. And a 2, you might have to shoot a number, you might have to shoot a color, you might have to shoot a shape. Or they could say, shoot me, something blue, or shoot me a triangle, or shoot me a red number 2. So you'd have to find that only one on that entire target. So those can be very frustrating. Sometimes you'll realize you shoot the wrong target. But yeah, that's a very good skill. Shooting under stress while having to think about a complex thing. And you wouldn't think that's very complex, but if you do it under time pressure with people watching you, it can be pretty complex. So that's a great one. That's one that I have done and have trained in the past that, yeah, you probably should be. That's a good one. So, having to think under stress and under time, duress, and getting shots at the correct target and having to differentiate between good targets and bad targets. That's a great one. Troy did not disappoint there. He came up with a lot of really good skills. So again, I'm going to reiterate, don't go out there and try doing, a backflip while shooting, a target with one hand if you don't have a firm grasp of the fundamentals. Your fundamentals are your core skills, and you need to always go back to the fundamentals and practice your fundamentals. However, once you have a grasp of the fundamentals, don't just go to the indoor range and shoot a standing static target at 5 yards and dump rounds. Challenge yourself. Practice these skills when you can, once you have a firm grasp of the fundamentals. These are things that come up in real life that is a lot different than just standing on a square range and shooting a target. Things that I would consider just a little bit beyond that we didn't cover, like obviously you need to learn how to shoot multiple targets. You need to learn how to shoot different draw positions, hands up, hands down, hands at your side, hands in your pocket, holding a coffee cup, whatever it is, right? You need to practice those. You need to practice those kind of shooting hands up, shooting hands down, shooting from a surrender, shooting from an interview stance. All those things you should be practicing. I would consider those just a little bit better or a little bit beyond the basic fundamentals. But try things that you don't try all the time. And these things are good to have. I'm not saying you got to do them every practice session, but every once in a while, you should. And there's a deck that I need to pull out. I haven't pulled it out in a while, but it's a dry fire deck. If you're dry fire, which you should be doing, daily, except for Sabbath, if your dry fire is getting a little dry, forgive the humor there, the dry humor, but if your dry fire is getting a little dry, there's a deck. I forget where I even got it, but if you look up like dry fire card deck, you can probably find it. I forget who made it. I forget the guy that made it, but it's just like you draw a card and it's different drills, and it's drills that you probably don't practice all the time. It's weird stuff in there. Some are pretty basic, some are pretty radical, but it's a good thing if you're like, I just don't know what to practice today, and I've got my core down, I've got my core skills down, I want to try something different. Either you can go back and listen to this episode, save it, listen to it, or you can get that dry fire deck and pull that out. That's a pretty good one to have. it's a pretty cool deck to have. I forget who even makes it or who came up with it, but it's a good one. And for everything I mentioned, there's probably 2 things that I'm not mentioning. But start here if you want to expand your being a well-rounded handgun shooter. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all that you do. Your tactical tip of the day: one of the keys to being fast and being a good shooter is being consistent. And part of that is having your gun in the same place all the time. So not just like, oh, today I'm going to put my gun in a slightly different place because it goes better. It makes my butt look better in these pants or whatever. I don't know what people think about. But you should have a dedicated place that your gun goes. Dedicated position. Like I carry strong side hip almost all the time. And if I'm doing something slightly different, it's as close to that as I can usually get. But you should have an index point, going back to the tactical tip of, okay, I generally always wear these pants. They might be a different color, but generally wearing the same kind of pants or shorts. And I know that right behind this belt loop is where I lace in my holster. That way it can only go so far back or forth. And my gun is in the same place if I'm going to draw it. You need to have a consistent draw place. You need to have like that index point on your hip or wherever you index your gun, that it's in the same place all the time. So you can grab that gun and you don't have to adjust your grip. Now, sometimes that's going to happen because of whatever reason. But in general, when you go to grab your gun, it should be in the same place. That's key. So think about your index point and remember it when you go to suit up, whether it's your duty rig or your concealed carry rig. Have that consistency in where your gun is placed. It's a system. And you might have the coolest whiz-bang gun on the planet, but if you don't know where it is when you go to grab it and you get shot in the face, it's not too cool. Forget about what looks cool on Instagram and think about what's practical. Having that gun in the same place, you can repeatably draw it from different, angles, different stress positions, different hand positions. That's a key thing. So having that index point for your gun, for your holster. Your tactical verse of the day. How about Daniel? It's been a long time since I've quoted Daniel, if I ever have quoted Daniel for your verse of the day. There will be a time of distress, such as never occurred since the beginning of the nation until then. But at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be delivered. Again, there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since the beginning of the nation until then. But at that time your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, and others to shame and everlasting contempt. My comments here, I don't have the other one memorized, but that's very akin to Jesus and the Gospels when he talks about the end times. And he talks about it, I think, in Matthew 24. I could be off on the chapter, but Jesus talks about, great tribulation, great distress, leading to the end of days, judgment day. So you probably want to be familiar with those verses. You can win all the gunfights if you want. You die and go to hell. You kind of missed the point, right? That's way more important. Your eternal salvation is more important than your mortal coil. So keep that in mind. Thanks for listening and have a blessed day.